A father made his obese twins work for a millionaire to pay off his crushing debt. At first, it seemed like the cruelest decision a parent could ever make. The boys, mocked and humiliated, were thrown into backbreaking work on a ranch where everyone expected them to fail. But what happened next shocked everybody. Instead of breaking, the twins began to change, gaining strength, courage, and a sense of worth no one thought they had. Just when hope appeared, a little girl whispered a secret to the millionaire that could shatter everything. A hidden past, a family torn apart, a community watching every move. Will these broken lives rise from shame to triumph? Or will the weight of old secrets drag them all down forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The yellow light from the old kitchen lamp cast long shadows across Samuel Rhodes' weathered face as he hunched over the scattered bills on his kitchen table. The clock on the wall ticked past 11 o'clock, each sound echoing through the quiet house like a hammer strike against his conscience. His calloused fingers trembled slightly as he punched numbers into the small calculator for the 20th time that night. "Lord, have mercy," he whispered, running his hands through his graying hair. The final total hadn't changed, $247,000. The weight of his failed hardware store pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. From down the hall came the sound of gentle snoring, his twin boys, Ethan and Eli, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the financial storm brewing around them. Samuel's eyes drifted to the framed photo on the wall, showing his late wife Sarah's smiling face. "I'm sorry, honey," he murmured. "I promised to take care of our boys, and now look at the mess I'm in." The latest letter from the creditors lay open before him, its threatening language leaving no room for interpretation. Final notice blazed across the top in angry red letters. Foreclosure wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was becoming a certainty. A sharp knock at the back door startled Samuel from his calculations. Standing on his porch was Jerry Matthews, a local man known for doing the dirty work for creditors. His thin lips curved into what might have been meant as a smile but looked more like a sneer. "Evening, Rhodes," Jerry said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. "Boss sent me to see about that payment plan we discussed." Samuel's throat tightened. "I'm working on it, Jerry. Just need a little more time." Jerry's eyes wandered to the hallway where the twins' room was located. "You know, I couldn't help but notice those boys of yours. Pretty big fellows, aren't they? Shame to see them sitting around all day when there's plenty of work to be had." The casual cruelty in his tone made Samuel's fists clench. "My sons are none of your concern. Just saying," Jerry shrugged. "Plenty of folks would pay good money for strong backs, even if they come with lazy fat boys attached. Might help with that debt of yours." Samuel stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "Get out." After Jerry left, Samuel sat in the darkness for a long time, his mind racing. Finally, he reached for the phone and dialed a number he'd been avoiding for weeks. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Samuel Rhodes. I know it's late, but I need to meet with you. It's important." Daniel Whitmore, the wealthy rancher who owned half the valley, was known for being fair but stern. To Samuel's surprise, he agreed to a meeting the next morning. Later that night, Samuel stood at the twins' bedroom window, watching his sons sleep. Ethan had kicked off his covers as usual, while Eli curled up tight beneath his blankets. Both faces, so similar yet distinct, were peaceful in sleep, untroubled by the worries that plagued their father. "Dear Lord," Samuel prayed softly, his forehead resting against the cool glass, "give me strength for tomorrow. Help me find a way to protect my boys." With one last look at his sleeping sons, he turned away to prepare for his morning meeting at the ranch. The old pickup truck rattled down the dusty road as the first rays of sunlight painted the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold. Samuel Rhodes gripped the steering wheel tightly, stealing glances at his twin sons in the rearview mirror. Ethan and Eli sat pressed against opposite doors, their faces masks of misery and resentment. "This is so stupid," Ethan muttered, crossing his arms over his chest. "We're not ranch hands." "Yeah," Eli added quietly, his voice barely audible over the truck's engine. "Everyone's gonna laugh at us." Samuel took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "Boys, we've talked about this. It's just temporary, until we can get back on our feet." The Whitmore Ranch sprawled before them, its endless acres of grass stretching toward distant mountains. A massive wooden arch marked the entrance, the name Whitmore carved in bold letters. As they pulled up to the main house, several ranch hands paused their morning chores to stare at the newcomers. "Dad, please," Ethan pleaded one last time. "This is humiliating." Samuel parked the truck and turned to face his sons. "Listen to me, both of you. We don't have any other options. Mr. Whitmore is willing to help us, but we have to meet him halfway." Daniel Whitmore stood waiting on the front porch, his tall frame straight despite his 60-plus years. His weathered face remained unreadable as Samuel and the twins approached. To Samuel's surprise, when Whitmore spoke, his voice was quiet and measured, nothing like the harsh tone he'd expected. "Mr. Rhodes," Whitmore said, nodding slightly. "These are your boys?" Samuel placed a hand on each twin's shoulder. "Yes, sir. This is Ethan and Eli." Inside Whitmore's office, Samuel humbly explained their situation, watching anxiously as the older man considered his proposal. The twins shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, faces burning red as they heard their father essentially bargaining with their labor. "I'll agree to reduce your debt," Whitmore said finally, "but under strict conditions. The boys must work hard, follow orders, and there can't be any complaining or causing trouble. Is that understood?" Before Samuel could answer, a group of ranch hands walked past the window, pointing and snickering at the twins. Ethan's fists clenched, and Eli seemed to shrink into himself. "Yes, sir," Samuel answered firmly, shooting his sons a warning look. "They understand." The day passed in a blur of paperwork and instructions. As the sun began to set, Samuel helped his sons move their bags into the ranch's bunkhouse. The reality of the situation finally hit home as he prepared to leave them behind. "I'll visit when I can," he promised, his heart breaking at their betrayed expressions. Ethan turned away, refusing to say goodbye, while Eli's eyes filled with tears he tried desperately to hide. Samuel climbed into his truck, each movement feeling like lead. In his rearview mirror, he watched his sons standing outside the bunkhouse, looking lost and abandoned. Their resentment was palpable, hanging in the air like the dust from his departing vehicle. He drove away with their silence ringing in his ears, praying he'd made the right decision. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Ethan and Eli stirred on their narrow cots in the bunkhouse. Every muscle in their bodies ached from the unfamiliar hardness of the thin mattresses. Eli rolled over with a groan, his joints protesting the movement. "Feels like I slept on rocks," he whispered to his brother. Ethan nodded, wincing as he sat up. "Everything hurts." Their quiet conversation was interrupted by loud laughter from outside. Through the thin wooden walls, they could clearly hear several ranch hands talking. "Did you see those fat twins trying to climb into their bunks last night?" one voice jeered. "Thought the whole building would come down." More laughter followed, making both boys' faces burn with shame. Eli pulled his blanket up higher, wanting to disappear, while Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Before they could dwell on it further, the bunkhouse door swung open. A weathered ranch hand stepped in, giving them a stern look. "Up and at 'em, boys. Mr. Whitmore's got your day planned out." The morning passed in a blur of failures. They struggled to lift hay bales that the other workers tossed around easily. The simple task of feeding livestock became complicated when Ethan accidentally spilled half a feed bag, causing more snickers from the watching ranch hands. Eli's attempt at cleaning stalls was painfully slow, his movements uncertain and clumsy. "Look at him," one worker muttered loudly enough to be heard. "City boys can't even hold a pitchfork right." The twins worked silently, faces red with exertion and embarrassment. Each new task brought fresh humiliation as their inexperience showed. By mid-morning, both boys were sweating profusely, their clothes dirty and hay-covered. It was during their struggle with a particularly heavy hay bale that Daniel Whitmore appeared. He watched quietly for a moment as they attempted to lift it together, their movements uncoordinated. "Plant your feet wider," he said suddenly, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Bend at the knees, not the waist. That's it." Following his instructions, they managed to lift the bale successfully. Daniel nodded, the barest hint of approval in his expression. "You boys have strong backs," he observed. "Just need to learn how to use them right. Keep at it." The simple words of encouragement, delivered without mockery or pity, struck something in both boys. Though they continued to struggle throughout the day, Daniel's words echoed in their minds. As evening fell, they dragged their exhausted bodies to the mess hall. The simple dinner of beans and cornbread might as well have been a feast to their hungry stomachs. Sitting at the end of a long table, away from the other workers, Ethan leaned close to his brother. "We can't let them win," he whispered fiercely to Eli. "We'll show them." A week had passed at Whitmore Ranch, and the early morning darkness found Ethan and Eli already awake in their bunks. Though their muscles still protested every movement, something had shifted in their demeanor. Without waiting for the usual wake-up call, they pulled on their work clothes and boots. "My arms feel like lead," Ethan muttered, rolling his shoulders. "Yeah, but at least we can move them today," Eli replied with a hint of pride. "Remember how we could barely lift them last week?" Outside, Daniel Whitmore waited by the feed storage, his weathered face showing approval at their punctuality. "Morning, boys," he said, gesturing to two large feed carts. "Today, we're trying something different." The twins exchanged glances as Daniel explained their new tasks. Instead of the back-breaking hay baling that had nearly broken their spirits, he showed them how to load and push the heavy feed carts to the cattle pens. The wheels made the work manageable, letting them use their natural size as an advantage rather than a hindrance. "You boys have got the build for this," Daniel said matter-of-factly. "Use your weight to get momentum going." That's it. By mid-morning, they had moved on to stacking firewood near the main house. Again, Daniel showed them how to leverage their strength effectively. The work was still hard, but for the first time, they felt capable. Jake, one of the more vocal ranch hands who had previously mocked them, watched them work. During lunch break, they overheard him talking to Daniel. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake said grudgingly. "Those boys are holding their own." Later that afternoon, their father's truck pulled up to the ranch. Samuel stepped out, his face etched with worry lines, clearly expecting to find his sons in the same state of misery he'd left them in. Instead, he found them working steadily, their movements purposeful, if not yet graceful. "Dad," Eli called out, straightening up from his task. Both boys were still red-faced and sweating, but their eyes held something new, a glimmer of confidence. Samuel approached cautiously. How are you boys doing?" "It's still hard," Ethan admitted, wiping his brow. "But we're figuring it out." "Daniel's been showing us different ways to do things," Eli added. "Ways that work better for us." Samuel's throat tightened as he watched his sons return to their tasks without complaint. Though they were clearly still frustrated by their limitations, they no longer carried the same defeated air. For the first time since this arrangement began, hope flickered in Samuel's chest. Maybe he hadn't failed them completely after all. As evening settled over the ranch, Daniel stood at the edge of the yard, watching the twins finish their final tasks of the day. Under the emerging stars, they struggled with a particularly heavy load of wood, but they didn't quit. They adjusted their approach, found better handholds, and kept going. A quiet smile played across Daniel's weathered features as he observed their determination. There was something in his expression that suggested he saw beyond just two boys doing their chores, as if he recognized the beginning of a greater transformation taking place. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Whitmore Ranch as Ethan and Eli trudged toward the main house. Their shirts clung to their backs, damp with honest sweat from a day's labor. The twins had been working since dawn, and their parched throats drove them to seek water from the main house's kitchen, a place they rarely ventured. As they approached the wraparound porch, they spotted a small figure seated on the wooden planks. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, sat, cross-legged with an array of dolls spread before her. Her dark hair was neatly braided, and she wore a pink gingham dress that seemed to catch the golden light. She looked up at their approach, her eyes wide with curiosity. Just then, Daniel emerged from the house, his boots making solid thuds against the porch boards. The little girl's face lit up with recognition, and she scrambled to her feet. "Mr. Whitmore," she called out, then paused, looking suddenly shy. Her small voice dropped to a whisper as she said, "Mommy says you're my daddy." The effect of those words was immediate and striking. Daniel's normally composed face went slack with shock, the color draining from his weathered cheeks. His hands, which had been reaching for the porch railing, froze mid-motion. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to touch. Ethan and Eli exchanged stunned glances, rooted to the spot. The moment felt too private to witness, yet they couldn't look away. Daniel's reaction told them everything they needed to know. This wasn't news to him. That evening, whispers spread through the bunkhouse like wildfire. The twins overheard fragments of conversation as they ate their dinner. "Loved her mother something fierce. Dot ran when the scandal hit, afraid it would ruin his reputation." The story emerged piece by piece. How Daniel had once loved a woman from town, but when their relationship threatened to cause a scandal, he'd chosen his reputation over love, leaving both mother and unborn child behind. When Samuel Rhodes arrived later that evening for his weekly check-in on the boys, the ranch hands were all too eager to share the gossip. The twins watched their father's face darken as he listened, his opinion of Daniel visibly shifting. The man they'd begun to trust their sons with suddenly seemed less honorable, more flawed. Thunder rumbled in the distance as darkness fell. In his study, Daniel sat alone, a leather-bound photo album open on his desk. His fingers trembled as they traced the image of a woman's smiling face, and beside her, a small child with familiar dark braids. Tears welled in his eyes as another crack of thunder shook the window panes, nature's fury matching the storm of emotions within him. The early morning sun peeked through the mess hall windows as Ethan and Eli sat at the long wooden table, their plates piled high with scrambled eggs and bacon. Unlike their first days at the ranch, they no longer hunched over their food or tried to hide their appetites. The other ranch hands chatted around them, and for once, no sideways glances or snickers came their way. "Pass the biscuits," Ethan called out, his voice steady and confident. A nearby ranch hand slid the basket over without comment. The simple act felt normal, natural even. After breakfast, Daniel met them outside, his weathered face thoughtful as he studied the twins. "Time you boys learned some real ranching skills," he said, leading them toward the tool shed. "Can't just be doing basic chores forever." Over the next few hours, Daniel showed them how to check fence posts for rot, measure the correct tension for barbed wire, and handle the heavy post hole digger. His instructions were clear and patient, nothing like the mocking tone they'd expected from their first impression of him. "Remember," Daniel said, demonstrating the proper technique, "you've got to test each post. A weak fence means lost cattle." He rapped his knuckles against a wooden post, listening for the solid thunk that indicated good wood. By midday, they'd moved on to horsemanship. Daniel led 2 gentle quarter horses from the stable, showing the twins how to properly saddle them. "A horse can sense fear," he explained, running a hand along one horse's flank, "but they can also sense respect. Treat them right, they'll treat you right." During their lunch break, Daniel excused himself, and the twins noticed him walking toward the main house where the little girl played in the yard. They watched as he awkwardly approached her, keeping his distance, but clearly wanting to connect. The girl looked up at him with bright eyes, offering him a toy horse. Daniel's usually stern face softened as he knelt beside her, and for a moment, the twins saw a different man entirely. That afternoon, while the boys learned to check the irrigation lines in the cornfield, their father Samuel arrived for an unexpected visit. He stood at the edge of the field, watching his sons work with sure movements, their faces focused and determined. The boys didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in their task. Samuel observed how they communicated with quick gestures, working together to clear a blocked line. Their movements were purposeful, confident. These weren't the same boys he'd left here weeks ago. Watching them, Samuel felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Pride. His sons weren't just surviving here, they were growing, learning, becoming men. For the first time since their mother's death, Samuel felt hope for their future. The afternoon sun beat down on the ranch yard as Ethan and Eli hauled fresh hay bales to the horse stables. Their shirts were damp with honest sweat, their movements purposeful and steady. A group of ranch hands lounged by the water trough, watching the twins work. "Well, look who it is, Whitmore's circus act." Jake, one of the older hands, called out with a sneering laugh. "Roll on in, boys, roll on in." The other hands joined in with cruel chuckles. In the past, such taunts would have made the twins shrink into themselves, their faces burning with shame. But this time was different. Ethan straightened his back and looked directly at the mockers. "You got something worth saying, Jake? Or are you just running your mouth because you're too lazy to do your own work?" The laughter died down as Ethan stepped forward, placing himself protectively in front of Eli. His voice carried across the yard, strong and best. "Clear. We're not ashamed of who we are anymore. We work harder than any of you, and Mr. Whitmore knows it." Eli stood tall beside his brother, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by quiet determination. "We're getting stronger every day," he added, his voice soft but firm. From the shadow of the barn doorway, Daniel Whitmore watched the scene unfold. A small smile of approval crossed his weathered face as he observed the twins standing their ground. He'd seen something in these boys from the start, not just physical strength, but character waiting to emerge. That evening, Samuel Rhodes sat in the local diner, catching bits of conversation from nearby tables. Mrs. Peterson, whose farm bordered the Whitmore ranch, was telling her friend about the changes she'd noticed in the twins. "Those Rhodes boys are different now," she said, stirring her coffee. "Saw them helping with the cattle drive last week. They've got some backbone growing in them." But at another table, the sneers continued. "They'll always be fat and worthless," muttered Tom Wilson, one of the town's more vocal critics. "Once worthless, always worthless. You mark my words." Samuel's hands tightened around his coffee cup, but he held his peace. He knew better now, had seen the change in his sons with his own eyes. Later that night, in the quiet of the bunkhouse, Eli sat on his cot with a small notebook propped on his knee. The lantern cast a warm glow across the pages as he wrote, "We're not worthless. We're stronger every day." The pencil moved steadily across the paper, each word a quiet declaration of truth. Outside, crickets chirped their evening song, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. But inside, in the peaceful glow of the lantern, Eli continued to write, recording the story of two brothers who were finally learning to stand tall. The morning sun cast long shadows across the church steps as Samuel Rhodes hesitantly guided his sons toward the entrance. Daniel Whitmore, he walked beside them, the little girl's small hand tucked trustingly in his. The usual Sunday crowd parted like water, their whispers sharp as knife edges. "Look who finally shows their faces," one woman muttered behind her hymnal. "Those boys actually fit through the door?" Another whispered with a smirk. Samuel's shoulders tensed, but he kept walking. Ethan and Eli, cleaned up in their best shirts, held their heads higher than they would have weeks ago, though their faces still flushed at the comments. Inside, they settled into a back pew, the wood creaking under their weight. The little girl scrambled to sit between Daniel and Eli, her innocent smile drawing reluctant grins from both the twins. Pastor James stood at the pulpit, his kind eyes scanning the congregation before settling on the unusual group in the back. His sermon began softly but grew in strength as he spoke about forgiveness. "Sometimes," he said, his voice carrying to every corner, "the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. But God grants second chances freely. Who are we to do less?" Daniel's weathered hands gripped the pew's edge, his knuckles white. Samuel stared straight ahead, but his eyes glistened. The words seemed aimed directly at their hearts. Daniel's past abandonment of his child, Samuel's sense of failure as a father. As the sermon continued, Mrs. Anderson, a widow known for her gentle spirit, turned in her pew to smile at the twins. When the congregation rose to sing, she leaned back and whispered, "You boys are looking stronger every week. It does my heart good to see you here." Her words, simple and sincere, fell like healing balm on years of hurt. Ethan and Eli exchanged glances, noticing for the first time that not every face in church held judgment. Some nodded in greeting, others offered small smiles. The tide of public opinion, so long set against them, showed signs of turning. After the service, as they stood in the sunlight outside the church, Daniel's hand came to rest on Samuel's shoulder. His voice was gruff with emotion as he said, "Your boys have more courage than most men I know." The twins stood straighter, their father's eyes shone with pride, and the little girl skipped ahead, her dress catching the morning light, a picture of hope on a Sunday morning. The county fairground hummed with excitement on that bright autumn morning. Colorful flags snapped in the breeze while the scent of kettle corn and cotton candy drifted through the air. Samuel Rhodes stood at the entrance, his weathered hands gripping the worn leather jacket he wore for special occasions. Beside him, Ethan and Eli shifted nervously from foot to foot, their work boots kicking up small puffs of dust. From his position near the registration booth, Daniel Whitmore watched the family with quiet intensity. His presence, though distant, offered silent support as the twins approached the sign-up table for the endurance competition. "Names?" the registration clerk asked, barely glancing up from her paperwork. "Ethan and Eli Rhodes," Ethan answered, his voice stronger than he felt. A few onlookers snickered, and someone muttered, "This ought to be good." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, trusting in the strength his boys had built over their months at the ranch. The competition course stretched before them. Stacks of feed sacks waited to be hauled, an obstacle course with hay bales to climb and poles to weave through. Teams of 2 would need to work together, sharing the load and supporting each other through each challenge. When the whistle blew, Ethan and Eli moved with surprising grace. Months of ranch work had transformed their bodies and spirits. They approached the feed sacks methodically, the way Daniel had taught them to pace themselves during long days of work. "Steady now," Eli murmured to his brother as they lifted their first load. "Remember what Daniel said about proper form." The crowd watched, first with amusement, then with growing amazement as the twins worked their way through the course. They weren't the fastest, but they moved with purpose and determination. Their teamwork was flawless. When one tired, the other stepped up, just as they'd learned to do during their ranch duties. As they crossed the finish line, the scoreboard revealed their time. Second place. The fairground fell silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Samuel, standing at the finish line, couldn't hold back his tears of joy. His boys, his wonderful, strong boys, had done it. Daniel's proud smile spoke volumes as he watched from his spot near the judges' stand. He'd known all along what these boys could accomplish if given the chance. Later, as the sun began to set, they gathered at a picnic table laden with golden fried chicken and sweating glasses of lemonade. The red ribbon lay in the center of the table like a badge of honor. "Pass the drumsticks." Ethan grinned, no longer self-conscious about eating in public. Eli poured lemonade for everyone, his hands steady and sure. Samuel watched his sons laugh freely, their faces glowing with more than just victory. They shone with confidence and self-worth. Daniel raised his glass in a quiet toast. "To the Rhodes boys," he said simply, but his eyes held a wealth of pride and affection. The family dug into their celebration meal, sharing smiles and stories as the fairground lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Victory had never tasted so sweet, and chicken had never been more satisfying. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when a black sedan pulled up to the Whitmore ranch. Samuel, who had arrived early to check on the boys, watched as a stern-faced man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped out, clutching a thick envelope. "I'm looking for Daniel Whitmore," the man announced, his polished shoes inappropriate for the dusty ranch yard. Daniel emerged from his office, his face tightening at the sight of the legal courier. The man thrust the envelope forward without ceremony. "You've been served, Mr. Whitmore. The court's decision is final." As Daniel read through the documents, his weathered face grew pale. Samuel moved closer, concern etching his features. The twins, who had been heading to the stables, stopped in their tracks, sensing the heavy atmosphere. "They won," Daniel said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "Sterling development. The court ruled in their favor. We have 2 months before they auction off the ranch." The news hit like a physical blow. Ethan and Eli exchanged panicked looks. This ranch had become more than just a workplace. It was where they'd finally found their strength, their worth. The thought of losing it made their stomachs churn. "There has to be something we can do," Samuel said, his voice thick with worry. All the progress, all the changes he'd seen in his boys, was it all for nothing? But Daniel had already turned away, retreating into his office. Through the window, they could see him sink into his chair, the weight of not just the lawsuit but years of regret visible in his shoulders. The little girl's mother had been right. His past decisions were coming back to haunt him, and now others would pay the price. The ranch hands gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves. The twins stood frozen, unable to process that their sanctuary might be torn down for some developer's profit. Dark clouds rolled in as the day wore on, matching the mood that had settled over the ranch. Samuel couldn't bear to watch his sons' faces anymore. The defeat in their eyes mirrored his own feelings of helplessness. He walked to his truck, needing space to think. The rain started as a drizzle, but quickly became a downpour. Samuel sat behind the wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped it. The rain hammered against the roof of his truck, drowning out everything except his thoughts. 2 months. In 2 months, everything they'd built here would be gone. The water streamed down his windshield, blurring the ranch buildings into watery shadows, as if they were already disappearing. The ranch felt different now. A heavy silence hung over the grounds like a thick morning fog that refused to lift. Ethan and Eli moved through their morning chores with none of their usual determination. Their shoulders slumped as they hauled feed bags and cleaned stalls, their movements mechanical and lifeless. "What's the point?" Eli muttered, leaning against his pitchfork. "We'll all be gone soon anyway." Samuel Rhodes drove up in his old pickup truck, watching his boys work. His heart ached seeing their defeated expressions. He climbed down from the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Boys," he called out softly, "come here a minute." They trudged over, and Samuel struggled to find the right words. "I know things look bad right now, but we can't give up hope." "You don't understand, Dad," Ethan said. "This place, it changed us, made us believe in ourselves." Samuel's throat tightened. He thought of all his failures, the failed business, the mounting debts, sending his sons away to work. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I've let you down so many times. I should have been a better father." Before the boys could respond, a car pulled up to the main house. A woman stepped out, her face set with determination. The little girl bounded out after her, but the woman gently directed her to stay by the car. "Daniel Whitmore," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "We need to talk, now." Daniel emerged from his office, freezing when he saw who it was. The woman marched up to him, years of pain evident in her stance. "You can't keep hiding from the truth," she said, her voice trembling. "Our daughter deserves better than that." Daniel's usual composed demeanor crumbled. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was a coward. I let fear of scandal drive me away from the 2 most precious people in my life. And now," she demanded. "Now I want to make things right," Daniel said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I've lost so much time. Please, let me try to be the father she deserves." The woman's expression softened slightly, though her pain was still evident. Later that evening, Samuel walked past the small chapel on the ranch grounds. Through the window, he saw Daniel kneeling alone in the dimming light. His lips moved in desperate prayer, and Samuel could just make out the words, "Lord, don't let me lose them again." The whispered plea hung in the sacred silence, heavy with regret and hope. The town hall was packed to the rafters, with every wooden bench filled and people standing along the walls. The air felt thick with tension and whispered judgments. Many had come hoping to see Daniel Whitmore finally get what they thought he deserved, to watch his ranch slip away from him. Daniel sat quietly in the front row, his weathered hands clasped together, his expression unreadable. Samuel Rhodes sat beside him, nervously glancing at his sons who stood at the back of the hall. The mayor had just finished reading out the details of the lawsuit and the impending auction when something unexpected happened. Ethan and Eli Rhodes stepped forward, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "We'd like to speak," Ethan said, his voice stronger than anyone remembered it. The townspeople shifted in their seats, some snickering, expecting another chance to mock the twins. But something was different about the boys now. They stood straighter, their eyes clear and determined. "When we first went to the ranch," Eli began, his quiet voice carrying across the hushed room. We were angry, scared. We thought our dad was throwing us away because we were worthless. Ethan picked up where his brother left off. But Daniel Whitmore saw something in us that nobody else did, not even ourselves. He taught us about more than just ranch work. He taught us about dignity. Tears welled in Samuel's eyes as his sons spoke about their transformation. Eli described the long days of physical labor, the small victories that built their confidence. Ethan talked about learning to stand up to mockery, to believe in themselves. Our father, Eli said, his voice catching, made the hardest choice any parent could make. He swallowed his pride and asked for help, not for himself, but for us. The room grew still as the twins described Daniel's patient guidance, his quiet encouragement, the way he treated them with respect when others only offered ridicule. Several women in the audience dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. That ranch isn't just land and buildings, Ethan declared, his voice firm. It's where broken people learn to become whole again. The silence in the room was different now. The townspeople who had come expecting entertainment found themselves faced instead with their own prejudices. They saw not the fat twins they had mocked, but two young men standing tall with dignity and courage. Pastor James rose slowly from his seat, his eyes bright with emotion. He looked around the room, meeting the gazes of his congregation. "We cannot let this ranch die," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, growing stronger with each passing moment. The tide was turning, hearts were changing, as the truth of what happened at Whitmore Ranch began to sink in. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the church hall, casting colorful patterns across the wooden floors. Long tables lined the walls, covered with mason jars labeled "Save Whitmore Ranch" and pledge sheets already filling with names. Church ladies had set up a bake sale table, the smell of fresh cookies and bread filling the air. Mrs. Thompson, who had once whispered cruel jokes about the twins, was the first to step forward. She placed $100 bill in one of the jars, her cheeks flushed with shame. "I was wrong about those boys," she admitted quietly to the pastor. More townspeople filed in, many carrying envelopes or checkbooks. Even Mr. Anderson, the hardware store owner who had laughed the loudest at the twins' expense, wrote a substantial check. "Maybe this will help make things right," he muttered. Daniel stood near the back, uncomfortable with the attention and generosity. His pride made it difficult to accept help, but Samuel placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes," Samuel said softly, "grace comes in unexpected ways." The twins moved through the crowd, thanking people sincerely. Their dignity in the face of those who had mocked them only deepened the townspeople's remorse. Every thank you was a gentle reminder of their past cruelty. Samuel watched his sons with tears in his eyes, amazed at how they had grown. These weren't the same boys he dropped off at the ranch months ago. They had become young men who could inspire a whole town to change. When the final tally was announced, a cheer went up through the hall. They had raised enough to help Daniel fight the foreclosure. Ethan and Eli rushed to their father, wrapping him in a tight embrace. "We did it together," they said, their voices thick with emotion. The scene perfectly captured the transformation not just of the twins, but of an entire community learning to see beyond their prejudices and come together in support of redemption and second chances. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as people packed the wooden benches. Samuel Rhodes sat with Ethan and Eli, their faces tense but hopeful. Daniel Whitmore occupied the front row, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. Besides him, the little girl swung her feet, occasionally reaching for his hand with innocent trust. Judge Harrison entered, and the room fell silent. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the thick stack of documents before him. The community's petition, filled with hundreds of signatures, lay prominently on top. "In all my years on the bench," the judge began, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, "I've never seen such an outpouring of support from a community." He paused, looking directly at Daniel. "Mr. Whitmore, your ranch isn't just a business, it's become a symbol of transformation and hope." The judge continued reviewing the evidence, the financial statements, the developer's claims, and most importantly, the testimony of lives changed at the ranch. When he finally looked up, a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Based on the evidence presented, and considering the extraordinary circumstances, I rule in favor of Mr. Whitmore. The ranch will remain in his possession. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Ethan and Eli hugged each other, then their father. Daniel sat still, overwhelmed by emotion, until the little girl tugged at his sleeve. Outside the courthouse, beneath the warm afternoon sun, Daniel lifted the little girl into his arms. His voice trembled as he addressed the gathered crowd. "I've spent too many years hiding from the truth," he said, holding his daughter close. "This precious girl is my daughter, and it's time I acknowledge that publicly." He looked at her mother, who stood nearby with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry for my cowardice. I want to make things right." The crowd fell silent, processing this revelation. Then Mrs. Thompson started clapping, and others joined in, moved by his honesty and courage. Samuel stepped forward, extending his hand to Daniel. The two men, once divided by pride and circumstances, shook hands firmly. Their eyes met in understanding. Both had been transformed by recent events. "This ranch," Daniel announced, his voice stronger now, "will become a place of second chances. Just like Ethan and Eli found their strength here, we'll help other struggling youth discover their worth." He looked at the twins with pride. "Sometimes, the greatest victories come from our deepest challenges." The townspeople cheered, their applause echoing across the courthouse steps. The little girl beamed from her father's arms, while Samuel stood tall beside his sons, their transformation complete. The ranch that had once seemed lost would now become a beacon of hope for others in need of a second chance. The golden sunrise painted the ranch in warm hues as dawn broke over the horizon. Where silence once ruled, laughter and cheerful voices now filled the air. Children from town, once skeptical of the ranch, now eagerly arrived each morning, ready to learn and work alongside their mentors. Ethan and Eli stood tall at the corral, their confidence radiating as they demonstrated proper horse grooming techniques to a group of youngsters. Their bodies, once a source of shame, had become strong and capable through months of honest work. The transformation went beyond the physical. Their eyes sparkled with pride as they shared their knowledge. "Remember," Ethan called out, his voice clear and steady, "always approach from the side where the horse can see you." Eli added gently, "And keep your movements calm and predictable. Horses are sensitive to our energy." Nearby, Samuel watched his sons with quiet joy. Gone was the weight of shame that had once bowed his shoulders. Instead, gratitude filled his heart, gratitude for the trials that had brought them here, for the strength they'd found in their darkest moments. Daniel walked across the ranch yard, his young daughter's hand tucked safely in his. Peace had settled into his features, replacing the haunted look he'd worn for so many years. His daughter skipped beside him, chattering about the horses and her new friends at the ranch. The morning sun climbed higher as Samuel made his way to the fence line. He leaned against the weathered wood, watching as his sons mounted their horses for the morning ride. They guided their mounts expertly across the golden fields, strong and sure in their seats. Tears of joy welled in Samuel's eyes as he watched them. His voice was barely more than a whisper as he said, "What happened next shocked everybody, even me." Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.